Hi, I'm Plexi. I'm making a game called Relics of Aurelia. If I never wanted anyone to play it, I'd describe it as a JRPG where you can't level up, a Metroidvania where you can't jump, and an action-adventure game with turn-based combat. If I wanted to completely oversell it, I'd describe it as a cross between Tunic and Golden Sun. If you prefer to decide for yourself, you can give the demo a try. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And also, it's not lost on me that video games are a visual medium, but currently all of the assets are placeholders, so apologies for looking so generic. But back on topic. While making Relics of Aurelia, I attempted to design an elegant solution to a problem that has plagued JRPGs since the genre's inception. That problem being needing to hold forward progression to become powerful enough to overcome obstacles laid out by the story. The most common solution to the problem has typically been to repeatedly defeat enemies who aren't quite a threat, but will grant you experience points that will incrementally increase your power level until you're strong enough to take on the encounters and environments in the story. This is also known as grinding. Many fans of JRPGs dislike grinding, but some enjoy the process of focusing on a simple, repeatable task that progressively makes their characters stronger. There are times when you just want to chill out and gain some levels without needing to focus completely on the game. Alternatively, you might want to just gobble up as much of the story as possible. So when I think of it at a high level, no pun intended, grinding is a method the player uses to arrange their gameplay sessions to suit their current and future preferences. Some games have attempted to do away with the need to grind at all, to ensure players are never forced to deviate from the critical path unless they choose to. Other games lean into the grind and create mechanics that polish that aspect of the gameplay to make the process of grinding either feel better during the grind, more rewarding after completing the grind, or both. I wondered if it was possible to design a progression system that never required players to grind but still rewarded players if they chose to do so. The two goals seem to be at odds. Grinding in games that didn't require it often felt unrewarding because there weren't enough difficult obstacles to overcome and validate the player's choice to focus on becoming stronger. While adjusting other aspects of the system in my game, I stumbled upon a pretty neat solution though. To explain it, I first need to set some context, so bear with me. In Relics of Aurelia, your source of power progression is primarily through obtaining pieces of equipment called relics. Each relic has a unique power as well as a unique curse, so equipping different combinations of relics allows you to create character builds that suit specific obstacles or environments. For example, let's say you have a relic that lowers your physical defense stat, but allows you to regenerate 10% of your HP every time you take a step in the overworld or a turn in battle. Now toss in a relic that lowers your chance to evade physical attack damage, but increases your magical defense stat. Equipping both of these at the same time would be a poor choice if your goal was to progress through a dungeon filled with enemies that you've been told only use physical attacks. Sure, you'd be able to regen some health, but your low physical defense and your low evasion would result in your character eating a ton of damage. But if your goal was to defeat a boss whose only method of attacking is with magical spells, you have a pretty effective setup. You get the benefits of the build in a scenario where the drawbacks won't affect you. This sort of power progression is inspired by games like Hollow Knight, Zelda Link's Awakening, and Super Metroid. It's a lot spikier than the smooth incremental progression of individual level ups typically seen in JRPGs such as Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, or Pokemon. When I refer to how spiky the power progression is, what I mean is that if you were to chart your change in power on a graph, this sort of progression starts with a flat line, then a huge spike up once you've obtained a relic. Most level up systems have a more consistent and gradual power curve. I typically prefer spiky power progression because I find it to be more exciting. And while I could have added the ability to level up in Relics of Aurelia, I decided not to because I wanted players to have the freedom to explore the world in a non-linear fashion, and I wanted to put the focus on what I feel is the most unique aspect of the game, learning about obtaining and strategically equipping relics to overcome obstacles. But then I got greedy. I wanted it all. I wanted a way for players to have exciting power spikes and non-linear gameplay, but also the option to grind enemies to gain power. To facilitate this, I came up with a very simple crafting system, where players can remove half of the effect of a relic's curse if they bring that relic and some specific materials or ingredients to a crafter who will provide them with an improved version of the relic. So if Relic's curse was to lower your physical defense by 20 points, the improved version of that relic would only lower it by 10 points. While this isn't as intuitive as simply increasing the power of the relic, or completely removing the curse, I did want to keep the powers of the relics and the curses within a certain threshold for lore and balance reasons. So, what does this have to do with grinding? Look, I promise, we're almost there. To improve a relic, you need a specific few ingredients. First, you'll need the specific relic you'd like to improve. You can find relics hidden away in chests, out in Aurelia's overworld and dungeons. Next, you'll want the recipe book for the improved version of that specific relic. Recipe books can also be found hidden out in the world, but they can be purchased at shops or received as quest rewards as well. Then, you'll need to hunt down a few fragments of that specific relic. Each enemy has a specific fragment it may drop once defeated. For example, the only relic fragment a cave bat enemy will drop is the Rusty Sliver, and the only enemy that drops the Rusty Sliver is the cave bat. Finally, you have to obtain some pieces of Monster Essence. Monster Essence is a generic and common material because it has a chance to drop from any and all enemies. Once you have all the pieces, you can bring them to a crafter in town who will use them to transform your regular relic into the improved version with its curse effect lowered by half. This lowered curse is effectively a buff that allows you to use the improved relic in more combinations or builds than it would originally be a viable addition to. It also obviously improves the combinations it already was viable in. So if we look back over the ingredients, the relic is already a part of the normal progression, so that's covered. The relic fragments and the monster essence are obtained by defeating enemies, which means they're the rewards for grinding. To finally go into detail on that, the relic fragments are rare drops that need to be target farmed from specific enemies. Their item descriptions state which monster dropped it, so once you have one, it's easier to track down the others you might need. The monster essence is needed in a relatively large supply and can be obtained by defeating any enemy, so it's perfect as a resource that can be farmed and saved up to be used on one or multiple improved relics depending on how long the player decides to grind. There are also 3 tiers of monster essence. Most monsters can drop lesser essence, some can drop greater essence, and very rarely a big threat will drop exquisite essence. Each improved relic recipe calls for 1 exquisite essence, but the lower tier essence can be combined up to craft that higher tier essence, so some of it's more exciting to get than others, but none of it's useless. Lastly, the recipe books aren't necessarily positively or negatively impactful on how the power progression of the crafting system works, but I like that I can put them in places in the world that the player has access to before they're able to access the specific relics that they're for. It helps inspire wonder of what else is out there and allows me to provide a recognizably powerful reward for quest completion, exploration, and monster slaying, since players can buy them with the money monsters drop. All that being said, the game is able to be completed without upgrading any of the relics, as long as the player obtains and strategically equips combinations of relics that suit the obstacles they're up against. Enemies also have the chance to drop currency as well as consumable items, like potions, so there still are rewards there for players who aren't going to spend the time to farm them. So now that we know all of that, how does it all shake out? Some pros of the crafting progression system are that you never need to grind to progress the story. You're still rewarded with an increase in power for grinding if you choose to. You theoretically can't be too overleveled. The power increase is still relatively spiky and exciting, and it allows for player expression in terms of which relics they prioritize upgrading. The cons of the crafting progression system are the power increase is capped rather early, and I don't know if it's the system itself or my system design skills, but boy is it hard to balance. Moving on, I've been thinking through some potential ways to further polish adjacent mechanics that would support this crafting progression system. Maybe make crafting something the player can do anywhere and not just at a smithy, or adding a bestiary to make target farming materials even easier, making repel items and lure items to allow the player to avoid enemies or grind more easily, or even limiting the number of random encounters that can occur each time the player enters or re-enters an area, and lastly, making on-screen enemy encounters instead of random battles. All of these are being considered, but for the moment I haven't settled on anything yet. They all have their own pros and cons that need to fit into the rest of the systems of the game. They also all need to sit on the back burner while I get the crafting system to a place where it's balanced enough to be improved. For example, as a theoretical system I think it's strong, but I'm still working on executing it in a way I can get the most out of it. In the current build of the game, crafting, while simple, is not signposted as well as I'd like it to be. The tutorialization of this particular system is currently adequate at best, and there's a few ways I can make this smoother that aren't very interesting to talk through, but I may make another devlog detailing them if that's something you'd be interested in. More importantly, I'm still experimenting with where I place each relic, the recipe book to improve that specific relic, and the monsters that can drop the specific relic pieces that will upgrade it. The balance of the game is quite sensitive to this sort of thing because if I place them all too close together, it cannibalizes some of the excitement of finding a new relic or discovering information on how to best make use of it. If I place them too far apart, the player may not have any relics they can upgrade and thus won't feel as incentivized to fight enemies, much less grind them. I'm doing my best to tread this line carefully. So where does that leave us? I'd say that the system works as intended. It rewards players who grind, but doesn't inhibit players who don't want to. Though it still needs a ton of adjustment to meet the spirit of the challenge rather than just the letter of it. But what do you think? Did I go too easy on the solution in my pros and cons analysis? Did I forget to highlight any other benefits you can see? What did I miss? What could I tweak or change? I'd love to know what you think in the comments. If you'd like to talk more about game design at length or just want to hang out with some laid-back people also into that sort of thing, feel free to join my Discord server. There's a link to it in the description. Thanks for watching, everybody.